Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure this evening to welcome you to the Washington Garden Seventh-day Adventist Women's Ministries Empowerment Session. On behalf of the ministry, we would just want to thank you for taking the time to stop by to listen to what we have to share this evening. And what we'll be focusing on this evening is women and health, with the topic, Know the Facts About Uterine Fibroids and Endometriosis. And to start, I would just want to give you a little background as to the reason for the topic this evening. According to research, fibroids are the most common benign tumors which occur in women and have an estimated global prevalence of 75% in women of reproductive age. Black women have a higher rate of hospitalization for fibroids compared to white women, 2 to 3 times more likely to undergo hysterectomy, that is the removal of the uterus, and 7 times more likely to have a myomectomy, that is the surgical removal of 1 or more fibroids. And for the endometriosis, it affects roughly 10% or 190 million of reproductive age women and girls globally. And that is according to the World Health Organization. So with these kind of statistics, Jamaica is included in those stats. And so the Women's Ministry, under the directorship of Mrs. Janet Grant, thought it prudent that we look at this issue this evening and share. And so before we get into it, we'd like to have a few minutes of devotion. So over to you, Sister Hutton.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome again. This devotional is Aspire. Do you know that in a race, all the runners run, but only one get the prize? Run in such a way as to get the prize. 1 Corinthians 9, verse 24. If you have no vision of your potential, you have no hope of victory. Circumstances will control your life and you'll find yourself sitting on the sideline. You need to climb the mountain in your life to give it your best. Peter Nelson, a 45-year-old dentist from San Luis Obispo, California, was asked to join an expedition climbing 29,028-foot Mount Everest. It was very unusual for a man his age, who was not a professional climber, to be asked to join this 10-member team. But because he lived a healthy vegetarian Adventist lifestyle, he was one of the most that was fitted for this. During the final stage of the climb, the group wanted someone to set a goal pace, but Peter in the lead, hoping to get to climb to the camp 4. But nightfall had finished. He had climbed 2,000 feet to the top of the next day. He pushed to climb 5,000 feet that day. As he approached Camp 4, his lungs began to fill with fluid from altitude sickness, pulmonary edema, which sometimes kills in 20 to 40 minutes. He spent the night sitting up, breathing oxygen and fighting for each breath and praying. In the morning, he began his trip down the mountain, while his team went up to the top without him. When someone asked Peter how it felt having failed to reach the top, he replied, "Victory is in running the race. I had an opportunity to climb Mount Everest. Reaching the top would have been wonderful, but what's really important is that you climb. All the mountains in your life you are encouraged to climb and enjoy. What mountains are you willing to climb today? Facing that today, we are asked to give of God and his courage of joy to be a climber. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we give you thanks and praise for your love and your mercy that you have taken us through the day until now. We look forward, my God, for this day, a day that we will learn more about our bodies. Because as we age, things happen to us that we may not even understand. But as we listen on this various platform, my God, I pray that you will clear the ways that we can hear and understand more about of ourselves. Thank you for being in our presence. Thank you for the presenter and for everyone who join us. Help us that we will have a life and live that is pleasing unto you. Help us to live a healthy lifestyle, my God, and that we will live the way that you want us to live. Take control now as we leave everything into your hands. In Jesus' holy and precious name I pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Sister Hutton, for that devotion. And so again, I want to welcome, since we did the first welcome, several persons have joined. And so we want to welcome those on Zoom. We want to welcome those on Facebook and on YouTube. So to speak to us about the topic, we have a very knowledgeable gentleman, and you would have seen the flyer, so you know who I'm referring to. He's an obstetrician and a gynecologist. His primary focus are pregnancy and antenatal management, general gynecology, pap smears, biopsy, and electrosurgery. Importantly, Dr. Abrams is a social commentator and a human rights advocate. I think his human rights advocacy is very prominent in his life, because when you look at his Twitter profile, he has the profile picture of Save Our Children. That's the logo he has up. And so when somebody actually show off what they are about, it speaks volume. And so this evening, we're so pleased that Dr. Abrams has taken the time out to share with us. Some of us would have heard him before, and we wanted more at the time, but of course it wasn't possible based on time. And so we're pleased to have you, Dr. Abrams. Welcome. Thank you for coming to share with us. And it's over to you, sir.
Hi, I was seeing myself a while ago. Can you see me?
Just a minute, let me, not yet. Your camera is off.
Okay, then.
Yes,
it was on a while ago and I don't know what happened. I didn't turn it off. I don't know what happened.
Okay. Are you able to see it at the bottom of the screen?
Yes, it was turned off.
Oh,
let me
okay,
start it again.
No, it's
I think whoever
now.
was running things turned it off.
Okay, it's on now.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, man, I'm hearing you fine. Are you hearing me okay?
I hear you wonderfully.
Okay, great. So yeah, and your video is on as well.
1 minute. Yes, it's okay. Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right, thanks for having me. I'm not really one to give lectures or talk too long, because I know that, we have a finite attention span. So I was asked to speak about fibroids and endometriosis. Is that right, Karine?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. So I just want to talk briefly about it. What I'm more interested in is answering questions and having conversations and just lecturing,
Great,
So
great. We welcome that, and we're happy that you will spare us that time. Thanks.
yeah, you get much more out of sessions that way. So briefly, I'll just try to avoid too much medical jargon. We'll talk about fibroids first, and fibroids are very common. Fibroids are tumors of the uterus. And when I use the word tumor, when people think about cancer when they hear tumor, but tumors are really swellings and they don't have to be cancerous. So fibroids are what you call benign tumors. Benign means not cancerous. And they're very, very common in Black women. Very common. One of the risk factors is just being a Black woman. I find in our society, it's extremely common. And for some reason, a lot of women present to the doctor's office with fibroids when they get really big. Some women have fibroids so big that they look like they're pregnant, but they're very common. So these tumors occur in the walls of the uterus. The uterus is like a muscle, really. It's a pear-shaped muscular organ. And the normal size uterus is smaller than my fist, okay? And fibroids go in the walls of the uterus. Sometimes they start to project or grow outward. Sometimes they project inward into the cavity where a woman bleeds or where a pregnancy develops, and those are the worst ones. But they're very common. And women with fibroids can experience anything from no symptoms whatsoever to severe symptoms. So a lot of women who have fibroids don't even know they have fibroids. Sometimes a woman will go to the doctor for an examination, for example, to my office for just a regular gynae checkup. And on examination, I may find that her uterus feels a little enlarged, and an ultrasound may show that she has fibroids or a fibroid. But if I didn't tell her, she wouldn't know. So some women have no symptoms. Some women have a lot of symptoms, and the symptoms can vary. So for example, fibroids can affect a woman's periods, can make the periods longer, heavier. They can be associated with pain as well. They can be more painful. Sometimes fibroids can affect a woman's fertility. Sometimes it can prevent a woman from getting pregnant. Sometimes it can predispose to problems such as preterm labor or even postpartum hemorrhage, bleeding after delivery. Some women have fibroids, and because of the location of the fibroids, they may have difficulty or painful intercourse. So there are a variety of symptoms. And the way we investigate fibroids, the most common thing to do is to do an ultrasound exam, and that will tell you where the fibroids are and how big they are. It's not always possible with an ultrasound to know how many fibroids are in a woman's uterus. If she has one big fibroid, that's easy to diagnose, but some women have so many, it's very hard. Some of the most fibroids I've ever taken out of one woman is 118. And there's no way I can count 118 on an ultrasound. So it varies significantly. It's important in investigations to check the patient's blood count as well. Because if the fibroids are affecting her cycle, making her have heavy periods, she can become anemic. And anemia really means when your blood count is low, your blood is weak. And the management of fibroids varies significantly. It can vary from no treatment at all. So for example, if somebody comes and they have no symptoms, they have children, had no problem getting pregnant, have no problem with intercourse, just come for a checkup and I realize they have a fibroid, say the size of, for example, a marble. Such a patient does not need any management. Some patients may need more intervention. So for example, if the periods are heavy, they may need to be on medication to decrease the blood flow or the blood loss with the periods. And this can vary from hormonal treatment to non-hormonal drugs. Another thing that's important is to look at the diet. And there is no magic treatment for fibroids, and women react differently. So some women, for example, if they alter the diet and they have a more vegetarian or plant-based diet, and they cut out red meat, they cut out processed food, they cut out dairy products. Some women, by doing that, they may have a more tolerable period or more tolerable periods. Someone had mentioned with devotion, you were talking, there was mention about Adventist lifestyle. And the thing about Adventists in general is that Adventist women tend to watch what they eat more than other women. And that's a good thing, because a healthy diet tends to make the symptoms less severe. But no diet is going to make the fibroids disappear. They're solid tumors. They're made up of fibrous tissue, and they're not going to disappear. But sometimes the symptoms may be more tolerable. If the symptoms are really, really bad, and the fibroids are big, and the woman may have an abdomen that looks like she's pregnant, surgical intervention may be necessary. And the type of intervention varies depending on the person's age and the reproductive ambitions. So if you have a woman who is 25 years old and has no children, the most appropriate type of surgical intervention, if you're going to need that, is a myomectomy, which means taking the fibroids out. If you have a woman, for example, who is 49 and has 6 children and doesn't wish to have any more children, and she has symptoms, the best thing would be to do a hysterectomy, which means taking the uterus out. Some people worry about hysterectomies and the symptoms they may have after surgery, such as menopause. But taking the uterus out by itself is not going to plunge a woman into menopause. Menopause occurs when a woman's estrogen level drops to a very low level. And estrogen is produced by the ovaries. And if you're doing a hysterectomy, you don't have to take the ovaries out. Another concern women have after hysterectomy is sexual function. And usually after hysterectomy, sexual function is either the same as it was before or better. It's usually not worse. Because if you think about it, if you're taking a diseased organ out of your body, you should have less symptoms. So that's one less problem to worry about. Women often ask me what causes fibroids. And it's very complex. There's no simple answer for that. We know that there's a racial predisposition. So for example, Black women have a much higher risk than Caucasian women or Asian women. There's a genetic link as well. So if your mother had fibroids to the point where she had to have surgery, and your sister has fibroids, then your risk is significantly increased. There's also a dietary risk. Women who are vegetarian, who have a lower risk of developing fibroids. So if you're a young woman who's a vegetarian and you have no fibroids, your risk of developing them is a bit lower than someone who was never a vegetarian. However, becoming a vegetarian after you develop fibroids is not going to make the fibroids go away, or it may help the symptoms. So that's the first thing about fibroids. There's this other thorn in women's sides, and it's called endometriosis, which is a different thing. I don't like to use the word hate, but I hate endometriosis, okay? It's horrible. And with endometriosis, what happens is that when a woman sees her period, what happens is that the lining inside the uterus is shed along with blood. So you pass the lining out and you pass blood out, it goes through the cervix into the vagina and is expelled. So that's what happens when a woman has a normal period. With endometriosis, what happens is that some of that lining, instead of being expelled through the cervix, some of it can spill internally, like going to the fallopian tubes and spill and end up in her pelvis internally. And some of it can be deposited on the uterus, on the tubes, the ovaries, the bowel, the bladder, wherever. And that can be a problem because when a woman is seeing her period or going through a menstrual cycle, there are these cyclical changes in our hormones. Most of you have probably seen these menstrual cycle charts where the hormones going up and down. So when you have these hormonal changes, what they do is that they make the lining of the uterus swell up. And if there's not a pregnancy, it's shed. With endometriosis, this tissue is internal and it's not shedding or going anywhere. So when the hormones start to act up, these deposits become swollen, inflamed, irritated, and they stay in a woman's pelvis. They don't go anywhere, and they can cause severe, excruciating pain. So like fibroids, the symptoms of endometriosis vary. They vary from no symptoms, because sometimes you go into a woman's abdomen for surgery, not for endometriosis, for something else, and you may realize that she has endometriosis. So some women have no symptoms. Some women have severe symptoms. The commonest symptom is pain. The pain is often with the periods. Some women have severe pain for the first couple of days. Some women have pain throughout the whole period. Some women have pain from before the period starts. And some women have pain all the time, even when the period is over. Sometimes the pain is so severe that it interferes with sexual activity. The pain can be so severe that it can interfere with a woman's daily activities and her quality of life. So some women have to stay home when they see their period. Some women can't function at work or at school. And endometriosis is also associated with fertility issues. So some women have problems getting pregnant when they have endometriosis. It can be that bad. And it's a very weird condition because unlike fibroids that is confined to a woman's uterus and her pelvis, endometriosis can end up in weird places. For example, it can develop and deposit in a woman's belly button or umbilicus, or it can even reach a woman's lungs. I had a patient who had endometriosis around her lungs, and every now and then her lungs would collapse, and it would become a surgical emergency. Some women have endometriosis that infiltrates and goes into the bladder, into the bowel, sometimes even the brain. It's very, very weird. And the management for endometriosis, unfortunately, we have no cure. But the management involves a combination of surgery and drug treatment. So surgically, you go in. The only way to really know for sure, is to do an operation called laparoscopy, where you pass a tube through the navel, and you look at the contents of a woman's pelvis on a screen, like a TV screen. That's the only way to know for sure. Sometimes you can suspect it. That's the only way to definitely know if that's what the patient has. Although many times we see patients, and by examining them and the history, we kind of figure that, yeah, they probably have that more than likely. Because unlike fibroids, endometriosis does not usually show up on an ultrasound, because it is not something that typically takes up space to cast a shadow on a scan. Although some women with endometriosis may have cysts in the ovaries. We call these cysts chocolate cysts, because the cysts consist of blood that has been broken down and looks brown in color like chocolate. I mean, it sounds kind of gross, but in medicine, we talk about appearances of diseased body parts and we relate it to food, but that's another story. But endometriosis can be very severe. So the management is a combination of drugs and surgery. Unfortunately, we have no cure yet. So there's no drug that we can give a woman with endometriosis and promise her that this drug will just get rid of this thing forever. Because even when you perform surgical management and you give a course of drug treatment, it can recur. There's another condition called adenomyosis. Someone had posted something, I saw it on the screen, that she has all three: fibroids, adenomyosis, and endometriosis. I call them the unholy trinity, because they give women hell when you have all three. So adenomyosis is similar to endometriosis, but the tissue that is in the lining, you find some of it in the wall or the muscle of the uterus itself. So when women have that, the walls of the uterus get very thick and very hard, very tough. And that can cause intractable pain and intractable bleeding. And that can also be a barrier to fertility as well. So the management, as I said before, is a combination of drugs, surgery, and dietary manipulation, because again, altering your diet can sometimes help your symptoms. And I have to confess that, to be honest with you, I think in med school, I don't think they spent enough time teaching us about how diet affects our health. And it's really a no-brainer because diet is like the fuel you put in a car. You know, if you put bad fuel in a car, you're going to get poor performance from the car or destroy the engine. And it's very important to watch what we put into our bodies. And it's also important to look at our environment. Because the thing about endometriosis is that it has been found that there's some dysfunction, it's the best way to put it, of the immune system in women with endometriosis. I'll explain what that means. I mentioned before that sometimes when women see their period, some of the blood and the lining spills through the tubes internally. There are many normal women that happens to, but their immune system is competent and it gets rid of whatever spills so it doesn't deposit and start to spread. With endometriosis, for some reason, there is some issue with their immune system, how it works, and it doesn't clear it up that well. So it's also important to look at your environment. The definition of health is physical, mental, and social well-being. And many times we forget about the mental and social part. So the physical part is one thing, but it's important to manage your mental health and your well-being at the same time, because if, for example, you have a painful condition like that and you are in a toxic household or in a toxic relationship or with an abusive spouse, that kind of stress can significantly magnify your symptoms and make your life way more miserable. So it's important to look at this thing holistically. Those are the most important things I want to tell you about these conditions. I know there are a lot of questions people have to ask or would like to ask. So who is the moderator? Karine, are you the moderator of this? Are you there?
Yes, I am.
So Karine, so I'm a very informal person, as you know. You know that.
Yes, we know.
The important thing, I mean, to give you like the basic points, but I know there are concerns that women may have or they want to ask or experiences they may want to share. So I don't know where you want to go with this, because I know there's some questions. I'm just looking straight and delivering my presentation now, but I know there are questions people have to ask, right? Would like to ask?
Yeah.
Am I correct?
And there's one that from Casey, and she asked, with Mirena, that's the IUD, the period flow is lessened. Where would that uterus lining go, since the natural course is to shed this blood through the period process?
Oh yeah, good. I see some questions now. Good. Hold on.
Mm-hmm.
Who's asking this?
Casey.
All right, Casey's asking, that's a good question. So I'll answer that question.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I like these kind of sessions, because, you know, they're very instructive. So when a woman is given medication that cuts down the period or stops it, the rational question to ask is, well, where does my period go? You know, because women sometimes think, okay, is it that this thing is building up inside of me and has nowhere to go and this thing just blocks it? So what really happens is that the Mirena is a kind of intrauterine device or intrauterine system. It's a device shaped like a T. It's okay. It looks like a little matchstick with a T-shaped thing at the top.
Mm-hmm.
And it has a hormone in it. The hormone is a kind of hormone called a progesterone. Let me explain what that means. Women have two sex hormones, estrogen and progesterone. Most of you here would have heard about estrogen, right? Most women. So estrogen drives endometriosis and progesterone counteracts estrogen. So when a woman has in a Mirena, what the Mirena does is it counteracts the estrogen and it stabilizes the lining of the uterus. So the lining of the womb does not overgrow. So it's not that the period comes and has nowhere to go. What it does is it suppresses the effect of estrogen and it quietens down the lining of the uterus. And any endometriotic deposits that the woman may have, the patient may have, it quietens it down. It kind of makes it chill out. And that's how it works. As a matter of fact, sometimes when people hear the word hormone, they get a bit nervous. And some people will be afraid of hormonal treatment because they may think, I don't want any hormones because I don't want to develop cancer. But the fact is that there are many different types of hormones. And this particular hormone, we have found, actually reduces a woman's risk of getting uterine cancer, cancer of the uterus. Because estrogen drives uterine cancer and progesterone counteracts it. So if you are a woman and you are using a Mirena, your risk of getting cancer of the womb is actually low. It's actually lower, to be honest with you. Would that answer the question?
Okay, so we have another question from D. What do you think about yoni pearls and steams?
That's a good question. And I have a good answer. I really don't know much about them things. And I've heard about them. I really can't say I've come across research to say that they work well or not. What I can tell you is that I'm a bit wary of these things because I'm not really sure if there's much science behind it. And all this steaming thing, I've met people who have been harmed by that, who've gotten burns, who've gotten irritative conditions as a result of it. So I can't really say, I can't give you a really fair and balanced commentary on that. I can just tell you I don't know enough about it to comment on it. I haven't seen enough research on it to say it's a good thing or a bad thing. But I'm a bit wary of it. That's what I can tell you.
All right, thank you. I am going to switch now to YouTube. There's a question. The first one on YouTube is, where's your office? That's the first question on YouTube.
My office.
Yes.
All right. My office is at 4 Ruthven Road, Kingston 10. It's near Halfway Tree.
Okay.
I work at Ruthven Medical Center. If you Google Ruthven Medical Center, RUTHVEN, that's where my office is.
Okay. All right. Thanks for that. I'll give you one. I'll give you one more from YouTube. Shirley Davis is asking, if a child starts seeing her period at 9 years old, can it be stopped for a later time?
It can be. All right. One thing that has been happening over the years is that the age of menarche. Menarche is the age at which a woman starts seeing her period. Has gradually gotten lower and lower and lower over the years. So for example, my daughter is with me. Ali, when you started seeing your period? What, 10? So my daughter started around 10, which is just a year over 9 anyway. Yes, there are drugs you can use to stop it. But the question is, would you really want to stop it? You know, some girls are starting their period early, and if it's a regular cycle, it may just be that this girl entered, you know, this phase of her life a bit early, and there may not be a really good reason to really stop it, because stopping it would mean administering hormones to her, and it really may not be necessary. On the other hand, if a girl starts seeing her period early and the periods are really erratic, unpredictable, prolonged, or painful, then you may want to intervene.
Okay, all right. So just to let persons on Facebook know, they can also post their questions. It will be, I'll ask Doctor for you. Okay, the next question, Doc, is from Shanita Cousins. Since laparoscopy is the only way to definitely diagnose endo, are there other less invasive procedures to rule it out in someone with all the symptoms?
Where's that question coming from? Where?
Shanita on Zoom. This is a Zoom
Shanita.
question.
Hi, Shanita. That's a good question. So laparoscopy is invasive. It belongs to a set of procedures we call minimally invasive procedures, because on one hand, it is invasive because you pass a tube into your abdominal cavity, into your abdomen, but it's minimally invasive because the incisions are small. The incision for the navel is very small, and there are usually 2 other small incisions to accommodate instruments to manipulate the pelvic organs. Having said that, That's the only way to definitely be sure. But sometimes the symptoms are so dramatic that we know patients have endometriosis, we strongly suspect it. But that's the only way to know for sure, because to really diagnose it, what you need is a specimen of tissue from inside to send to the lab for them to use the microscope, look on it and say, yeah, this person definitely has endometriosis, because there are other conditions that can make a woman have painful periods. Endometriosis is not the only one. There are other things that can make a woman have severe pelvic pain. For example, if a woman has a pelvic inflammatory disease, which is a condition in which there is severe inflammation of her tubes and her ovaries, that can cause severe pain. And it can mimic endometriosis. So there are other things that can actually cause it. So the laparoscopy is really the only way to definitely know for sure.
Okay, thanks.
Hold on, having said that, hold on. Having said that, if we have somebody who we think has, and like we are convinced has endometriosis, we'll often start management anyway. Like there are drugs, there are medications we'll give them that will actually make them have a better quality of life anyway. So that doesn't mean we're going to withhold treatment until you go and have surgery done. I made that very clear. Because if you do surgery privately, that costs a lot of money. If you go to the public sector, the wait may be very, very long. So we would never withhold managed treatment. I mean, the best thing is to have a discussion with the patient and they make an informed decision. So for example, recently, I saw a teenager in my office, her mother brought her. I think she has endometriosis based on her symptoms. She has severe period pain. She curls up in the bed and lies down when she has her periods and she can't go to school. She's never been sexually active. So the pelvic inflammatory disease is not a likely diagnosis with her, because that is something that is usually triggered after you get a sexually transmitted infection. So with her, I spoke to her mom and I said, listen, I think what we're dealing with here is endometriosis. And I think a course of treatment geared at managing this would be appropriate. And we made a decision to try on a course of medication that would be appropriate to see how that helps her. So we're not gonna withhold treatment just because the patient can't have that kind of surgical intervention.
Okay, Doc, there are several questions, and I'm going to try to see if there's
ask me the whole of them.
There's one from on Zoom. Clover is asking, I am presently doing a treatment for my fibroids with a naturopathic doctor. Would this process be helpful? And I'm going to twin it with this question on YouTube that asks, can herbs help shrink fibroids? Because I think they're related. So, okay. So that's Tally Black on YouTube asking that question.
Okay.
Yeah.
She's been to a naturopathic doctor, and I'm not sure what course of treatment the naturopathic doctor is giving her. So I can't fully answer that question. So far, we haven't gotten convincing evidence that treatment like that is going to actually make the fibroids go away. They may shrink them somewhat, but I'm going to share something with you, because when I finished med school and I finished specializing, I realized that what I was taught was really a Eurocentric view of medicine. You know, medicine, the way Europeans teach medicine. There are a lot of other modalities I didn't know much about, such as herbal medicine, acupuncture, acupressure, reflexology, etc. And I went on a quest to kind of learn about how these other modes of management can help. With the herbal stuff, modifying your diet and taking herbs can definitely improve your quality of life if you go to someone who knows what they are doing. So for example, there's a herb called shepherd's purse. Shepherd's purse is a herb that can decrease a woman's blood flow or blood loss. It definitely works. It has been researched and it works. It's not going to make the fibroids go away, but it helps. So a friend of mine, her name is Shelly Ann Weeks. Shelly Ann has fibroids, and she doesn't mind me sharing this story with you, because Shelly Ann is my friend. She has big fibroids, and there was a decision made that, boy, with the size of the fibroids and her symptoms, surgery would be her best option. And she went on a journey to discover what kind of dietary manipulation could help her to avoid surgery. So she went on a special kind of diet. She lost weight. She was never overweight anyway. But what happened to her is that her symptoms subsided significantly. As a matter of fact, I'm going to look for a number I'm going to tell you. Because everybody's body is different, by the way. So what works for some people may not necessarily work for others. So for example, there are some drugs we will use. There's a drug called Visan that was manufactured specifically for women with endometriosis. One of my patients takes it every month, and her quality of life is wonderful. Her life has changed since she's been on that medication. I have another patient I gave it to, and she brought back the pack before it was even finished because she just couldn't tolerate it. So everybody's different. Hold on. So I'm going to put this number out there. My friend's name is Shelly Ann, and she doesn't mind me giving you this number. She wrote a book about, I think it's called How I Changed My Diet and Changed My Life. She wrote that book. It's a good book. Her name is Shelly Ann Weeks, SHELLY-ANN-WEEKS. And Shelly Ann's number is 876-798-0820. You see, I really believe in a holistic approach. So that's Shelly Ann's number, Shelly Ann Weeks, 876-798-0820. And if you call her, tell her that I told you to call her. She calls herself the period lady. And her life's mission is to educate girls about menstruation, about ending the stigma associated with periods, and fighting period poverty, which is a concept I only recently, over the past few years, even learned about. Because as a man, buying feminine products is not even on my radar. I don't need them, you know? I buy them for my wife, for my daughter, but I don't use them, obviously. And then I came to realize that there are many women who, because of financial constraints, can't even afford to buy pads and tampons every month. So my friend Shelly is on a mission. She's a wonderful person. So I just putting it out there. You can talk to her. So dietary manipulation herbs can definitely help, but it may not help everybody the same way.
Okay. All right. Ramon Cunningham, I was diagnosed with PCOS and I am overweight. Am I at risk of developing uterine fibroids and endometriosis?
All right. So we got into another story now. So I'll tell you what PCOS is. PCOS is polycystic ovarian syndrome. And they call it that because women with this condition typically have ovaries that have a certain appearance, and we call it appearance polycystic. Ovaries have these things called follicles in them. That's where the eggs develop. And when a woman has polycystic ovaries, and you look at the ovary on an ultrasound machine, it has an appearance like, you know what a pearl necklace looks like pearls strung around in a circle. That is how the follicles arrange themselves in the ovary. These women tend to have very erratic periods. So for example, they may miss periods for a month or 2 or 3 or even longer. And then when the period comes, it doesn't want to stop. It's like it never rains, but it pours. Many of them have issues where they're overweight, above the ideal weight. Some may have fertility issues. Some may have excess body hair. Some may have problems with acne. And it's various combinations because some people have PCOS and are slim. Some women have PCOS and they have normal fertility anyway, but it's a spectrum. So she was asking if she's at risk for developing fibroids, and PCOS doesn't necessarily increase the risk of developing fibroids or endometriosis. It's a separate condition. Although these conditions can coexist, PCOS wouldn't put her at risk for developing fibroids.
On PCOS, Doc, Arlene Orton is asking, what is the best treatment for PCOS, especially dealing with severe irregular period?
So PCOS is a complicated thing. It's very complex. And with PCOS, a lot of hormones in a woman's body go haywire. So for example, the female sex hormones may go haywire. Some women may have excess testosterone. Testosterone is a sex hormone that is higher in men than in women. Some women with PCOS may have very high testosterone. Some may have elevation of a hormone called prolactin. Prolactin is normally elevated when a woman is breastfeeding. It stimulates the production of milk in the breasts. Some women have glucose or insulin abnormalities as well. So the management of PCOS is very complex. If a woman is overweight, however, losing weight is essential. It's very important to lose weight because, like endometriosis, estrogen drives PCOS, makes it worse. When a woman has excess fat in her body, that excess fat can actually produce estrogen. Estrogen can be produced in fat cells. So you find that some women, when they lose weight, they may actually go back to having a regular cycle just by losing weight. So losing weight is important. Going on medication to regulate the cycle is also important. And the type of medication to regulate the cycle depends on the woman's reproductive ambitions as well. So for example, if you have a woman with PCOS who wants to get pregnant or is trying, you put her on medication that has no contraceptive effect whatsoever. If you have a woman like a young woman who does not wish to get pregnant, some types of birth control pills may be important or helpful or useful, as well as dietary manipulation. So the management varies significantly. Some women need to go on drugs. There's a drug called metformin that was initially manufactured for women with diabetes, but is also very useful in PCOS because, as I said, sometimes you can have these glucose or insulin abnormalities. And insulin is the hormone that helps to regulate glucose in your body. So some women may need to go on metformin. Some women do not respond to medical treatment at all. And sometimes, again, you may have to do something surgical. Again, laparoscopy may be useful. With laparoscopy, what we do is we do the laparoscopy and we burn or drill holes where the small cystic areas in the ovaries are. And sometimes that procedure alone may make a woman revert to having a regular cycle. So when you're talking about PCOS, it depends on the symptoms the patient has, on her weight and her reproductive ambitions. It depends on many different things. So there's no single treatment you're going to give everybody with PCOS. It varies.
Okay. All right. A question from Facebook. Diane Rowe is asking, is it a cause for concern if is spotting for a week before the period flows?
When you say cause for concern, it is a cause for concern because it's abnormal. It is an abnormal thing to have that bleeding before the period. And it is something worth investigating because it could be due to many different things. So for example, when we have something called a polyp, which is a small growth sticking out through the opening of the cervix, that can cause spotting before the period. Some women have fibroids, and depending on the location of the fibroids, for example, if the fibroids are projecting into the cavity of the uterus where she bleeds from, that can cause abnormal bleeding. Sometimes endometriosis can cause it, adenomyosis can cause it. Sometimes it can be caused from a bleeding condition where the blood doesn't clot well. So sometimes a hematological problem can cause it. Certain infections of the cervix can cause it. If the person is on certain types of medication, it can cause it as well. So it is something that ought to be investigated. Yes.
Okay. Another one from Facebook. What could cause me to have headaches at the end of my period for about 3 to 4 days? No painkiller works. It stops by itself.
Some women have what is called menstrual migraine, where they have severe headaches with the period. And again, it varies because some women have headaches premenstrually. Some have it postmenstrually. Premenstrually means before the period. postmenstrually after. So if, as this person says, the headache does not, like painkillers don't work, it is something that really should be investigated, because it could be a hormonal reason. That could be the cause, but headaches that do not respond to painkillers are best investigated, because you don't know what is causing a headache. It could be something like a brain tumor. I'm not saying this lady has a brain tumor. I'm just saying it's something that ought to be investigated, because there are many different causes, ranging from a brain tumor to hormonal causes.
Okay, there's one more on Facebook. That's Nadine Goodall said, may have pressure and diabetes and yeast follow me up no matter how much pill I take.
So she has pressure and diabetes and what?
And yeast follow me up no matter how much pill I take. I'm not sure, but she said she has pressure and diabetes and yeast follow her up no matter how much pill she takes. I'm not, yeast. I don't know if she meant yeast as in Y-E-A-S-T, but it's E-A-S-T there. So if you want to clarify, Nadine, please do so. Yeast infection, okay. All right, somebody's clarifying it, that is yeast infection.
Oh, yeast, okay, so let me explain that one now. It's a different thing now. So a yeast infection is an infection caused by a kind of fungus. And some women are plagued with it. And there are different reasons why a woman can get a yeast infection. So the thing is that the vagina always has several different types of bacteria and other what we call microorganisms. So it's not uncommon for yeast cells to be in the vagina, not causing a problem. Sometimes they will overgrow. So for example, if a woman takes antibiotics, for whatever reason, for example, a sinus infection, antibiotics kill bacteria, but antibiotics do not kill yeast. So if you wipe out the bacteria down there, the yeast is going to overgrow, and that can precipitate a yeast infection. But this lady also said she has diabetes.
Yes.
And yeast is something that feeds on sugar. So diabetics can be plagued with yeast infections, because if the blood sugar is not controlled very well, if it's not stridently and strictly controlled, tightly controlled, it can facilitate recurrent yeast infections. So that is, diabetics are notorious for having recurrent yeast infections. So that could be part of our problem. Another problem is that they have different strains of yeast. So sometimes if you're giving a certain type of medication to treat it, if it doesn't respond, you may have to use a different kind of drug that manages yeast infection, but a different class or a different type of drug. So for example, there's a drug called miconazole. And miconazole works very well. But if somebody keeps taking that, it doesn't work. They may need to use a different drug, like one called itraconazole. So you may need to change that. The other thing is, sometimes women have recurrent infections and they think it's a yeast infection, and it may not be a yeast infection. So I'm not sure if this lady was actually diagnosed with a lab test or not. But for example, there's another common infection called bacterial vaginosis that tends to be recurrent, and sometimes when mistaken for a yeast infection. So a yeast infection is commonly something that causes a thick discharge. It has been described as looking like cottage cheese or curdled milk. And it tends to itch and cause irritation. And it tends not to really have an odor. Bacterial vaginosis produces a white discharge. But this discharge tends to be milky, and it tends not to irritate, but it may have a fishy odor. Sometimes they can coexist. But sometimes women have bacterial vaginosis and they think it's a yeast infection. So what she may need to do is go to her doctor and ask if a swab test can be done to confirm if it really is a yeast infection. She may need to look at the level of her glucose control as well, because that can be a precipitating factor to having recurrent yeast infections. And the other thing is, if she's sexually active, her partner may need to get treated as well, because you don't have to be sexually active to get a yeast infection. It can be a virgin and get a yeast infection. But sometimes the male partner may carry it. And if a woman is having regular intercourse, the partner may need treatment as well. So that's another thing that she may want to look at.
Okay. All right. From Zoom now, I have KS. I have a fibroid 10.8 centimeter large. I am told that a hysterectomy is the best option. Due to my high risk of cancer, mom and aunt had cancer and both passed. Comment on my option. The person is asking me to comment on her option. KS.
I want to know how old can she tell you how old she is and if she wants to have children?
All right, KS, I'm going to ask you to just take the mic and respond, because there are so many questions. If I scroll all the way down and you respond, I might miss it. So please take the mic if you can and respond to the question, please. That's KS. In the meantime, Samantha is saying, I am having challenges with endometriosis, fibroids, and PMS, having a lot of allergic reactions to a number of NSAIDs, but the pains are unbearable each month.
Yeah, go ahead. Hello?
I'm not sure if the person is asking the question.
No, she made a statement, but is there a question along with that? I mean, I'm sorry she's going through all of that, but she wants to ask.
Yeah, there's no question for that. She's just saying, yeah, there's no question. I'm
sorry she's going through that, man, but if her symptoms are not really going away, she may be a candidate for surgical management if she hasn't had surgical management already. So I don't know. That may be the next option if it's that severe.
Okay. All right. There are two questions here. Cheryl is asking, is there a surgery alternative to adenomyosis?
Adenomyosis.
Okay.
Sometimes what we can do is that adenomyosis is a difficult thing to manage, because with fibroids, for example, you cut these tumors out of the uterus. With endometriosis, you'll find the deposits and burn them. But with adenomyosis, what happens is that the walls of the uterus are just very thick. The entire walls are just very thick. And you can't just cut all the walls of the uterus out, or there may no more uterus left. Sometimes surgically, what we can do is called a debulking operation, where we cut a lot of the muscle out. So that can work, depending on the size of the uterus. So that there is a surgical option, but you'd have to discuss that with our doctors.
Okay. All right. Somebody's asking, which foods negatively impact endometriosis? And yeah, that's one question.
It varies from person to person, but for some people, cutting out dairy and like sugar, for example, caffeine, red meat, if they do eat red meat, those things may make a difference. Cutting those out.
Okay. One other person is asking, how effective is ovarian wedge resection and drilling for PCOS?
That's another good question. I mentioned that before, that we don't do the wedge resection as much nowadays, but the drilling thing is done, and it is actually quite effective. It very often causes the cycle to revert to normal, just that it's an invasive procedure. It's a surgical procedure. So you'd have to go to the hospital and have it done in an operating theater. But that's an option, although we normally try drugs before we go to surgery.
Okay. Latanya is asking if a woman already has fibroids, can adopting a vegetarian diet put her at a lower risk for having more?
And that's a good question. And if the research suggests that if a woman is vegetarian from in her youth, she has a lower risk of developing them. The research has not proven that if you have fibroids and become a vegetarian is going to prevent it from getting more fibroids. So the research has not shown that. That does not mean it does not happen or can't happen. Just I would have any research to say, yes, that will definitely take place.
Okay.
But it can't hurt. It definitely can't hurt though. That's for sure.
Okay. Janelle is stating here, she has been advised that there's a remedy to shrink and remove fibroids. Turmeric, black pepper seeds, ginger, and lemon taken as a tea and had every morning on an empty stomach. Could this work, or is surgery the only option to remove large fibroids? I think you had touched that earlier.
All right, so it's, again, using that combination may help her symptoms, but it's not gonna make the fibroids go away. I can tell you that much. Because you're talking about, if you have large fibroids, it's very hard, firm tissue. It's like, I don't know if you know those rubber balls that are solid. You know how tennis balls and ping pong balls are hollow. You know those solid rubber balls that kids play with? And when you drop it, and when you hit it on the ground, it bounces very high. Fibroids are kind of like that. They're very tough, very hard. And we haven't found anything so far that would make them actually disappear.
Okay. A question from YouTube. What are your recommendations for managing fibroid degeneration pain while pregnant?
No, that's a good question. So I'll tell you what that means. Degeneration really means is a situation where the central part of the fibroids, the blood supply is compromised and it starts to get very soft and it can be very painful. The best way to deal with that is to take painkillers. But in pregnancy, we try to avoid giving very strong painkillers because it can affect the fetus. So the best advice to deal with that is to use paracetamol. Paracetamol comes in different brands. So Panadol, Tylenol, Cetamol, they're all paracetamol. That's the best treatment medically to use when in pregnancy because the other drugs are kind of, were not really that safe to be taken in pregnancy.
Why does a person's period stop after tubal ligation? And is it normal?
It's not normal for a period to stop after tubal ligation. Tubal ligation is just, they have different procedures where you just block the tube to prevent the sperm from meeting the egg. That has nothing to do with the menstrual, like a woman seeing her period. Say if a woman has tubal ligation and stops seeing her period, there's something else going on and she needs to be investigated. It's not something that is supposed to stop your period.
Okay. Okay, I'm trying to see if I can get everybody's questions across the different platforms. What happens to fibroids during menopause?
All right, so fibroids are driven by the female sex hormones. And in menopause, what happens is that a woman's estrogen level drops. So you find that in menopause, one of two things will happen. Fibroids will either remain the same size, stop growing, or they may shrink a little, but they don't disappear. Because in menopause, they're not going to get the same kind of hormonal support to help them to grow as in a woman's youth. So you find that in menopause, they're either going to stop growing or they may get a little smaller, but they're not going to disappear.
Okay.
So if you have fibroids and your uterus is at the level of your umbilicus, your navel, your belly button, and you enter menopause, the fibroids are not going to disappear. They'll stop growing, or they may shrink a little bit, but they're not going to go away.
Okay. Doc, KS had asked a question and you wanted to know the person's age. KS, I understand you raised your hand. Can you go ahead and respond, please?
Okay, good evening, everyone. My age is 48. I'm 48.
Okay,
and I have no interest of having any more children.
Hi, yeah, man, you say you're 48. And what's the question? What you want to ask me now? What was the question again?
Okay, all right. She had asked, she has fibroids, 10.8 centimeter large, and told that hysterectomy is the best option. But due to her high risk of cancer, mom and aunt had cancer and both passed. So she asked you to comment on her options.
All right, fibroids really don't have anything to it cancer risk, really. But if she doesn't wish to have children and she's 48 and they're big, and she said 10 centimeters.
Yes, it's almost completely filled up the uterus.
Yeah, when it's that size at that age, it's probably best to take it out. There's not really a cancer risk, but let me tell you what happens. When women have fibroids and you do an ultrasound, for example, sometimes you're unable to see the lining of the uterus properly. And because you're unable to monitor it properly, you may not know if there's some cancer growing somewhere. Fibroids are going to increase a woman's cancer risk. But
no, but I think that's what the doctor explained as well. That yes. You can't tell what is happening.
Yeah, so
couldn't
if it's that
see.
big,
Go ahead.
If you have fibroids that big, it's really best to take them out. And there are two options she has. Is a hysterectomy, which is taking the uterus out. So if she's 48 and she does not wish to have children, that would be the best option surgically, because you just take it out and there's no risk of anything again. If she wishes to have children, or this is important as well, or if psychologically the thought of a hysterectomy would be traumatic for her, the other option is to take the fibroids out. But with something that size, I recommend some type of surgical intervention.
Would you also remove the ovaries?
No, I wouldn't at her age. No, unless they're unhealthy. No.
Okay.
Remember I mentioned health is physical, mental, and social well-being. And you find that sometimes a surgical solution may work very well to fix something physically, but it can cause psychological morbidity. So for example, a woman may come and she's 49 and has problematic fibroids and has no kids. I know that at that age, it's unlikely she'll have children. The best thing is to take the uterus out. But some women are very attached to their uteri. That's something I've come to understand and respect. Women are different. So you have some women in their 30s who want their uterus out. And you have some women who are 50 odd who still want to keep it for whatever reason. So it's important to have that conversation and decide which option will be more appropriate for that patient. But if she has something that size, a surgical option would be appropriate. You want to get those fibroids out of her body with or without the uterus attached to them.
Okay, I was being advised by a doc to remove both the uterus and the ovaries. And the reasoning behind that were my history, basically.
You see, and there's something that is an individualized decision between a patient and her doctor, because you look at risk factors for disease. So for example, if you have a woman who has a family history of ovarian cancer, then taking out the ovaries may be a better option along with the uterus or the fibroids, along with the uterus, sorry. So it depends on the person and their risk factors.
Thank you.
Okay, there's a question now. If the tubes are removed completely, what would that affect the period?
The tubes are removed. It ought not to. Sometimes when we have a change in the cycle after that, because of the blood supply to the ovaries and the fallopian tubes, it may be altered a bit, but it shouldn't be something that would, for example, make a woman's period stop or become prolonged or become heavy. It ought not to do that.
Okay. Can polycystic ovarian syndrome make you sterile?
You see, the word sterile now implies that there's no way you can have a kid. Like, all right, for example, if a woman has both tubes taken out and she's sterile. So polycystic ovaries wouldn't really make you sterile, but they can be a barrier to a woman's fertility. because what happens is that the hormonal disruption and the cycle irregularity can make it very difficult to get pregnant, at least without pharmacological intervention. So it can, I would not use the word sterile, but it can affect a woman's fertility. It doesn't have to, but it can. Because I've delivered several women who have polycystic ovary syndrome, PCOS. So it doesn't necessarily cause that, but it can affect a woman's fertility.
Okay. Are there contraindications with taking both herbs and hormonal treatment simultaneously? I'm assuming it would be dependent on the type of herbs. So the person is asking if there are contraindications.
That's a good question, and it depends. It depends on the herbs and the hormones, because the kind of herbs women use is such a wide variety or variation of them, and the kind of hormonal treatment is varied as well. So it would depend specifically on which herb she's taking and which medication she's taking, and that's a very important point, because sometimes when people go to the doctor, they don't disclose what other treatments they're taking. And that's why it's very important to declare to your doctor what exactly you're taking, because they may put you on some medication that may interact with it unfavorably. So it can happen. It depends on the herb, though. To declare to your doctor what exactly you're taking, because they may put you on some medication that may interact with it unfavorably. So it can happen.
Okay.
It depends on the herb, though.
The question is, a friend had done surgery to remove fibroids some years ago and is now in menopause, but has menstrual cramps almost every month for the last 8 years. What is the cause?
No, that's a good one. I can't answer that question, because in a menopause, there are no more periods. What happens in the menopause is that a woman's estrogen level drops so low that it no longer causes, cyclical changes. So if she's having these symptoms, I really can't answer that question. It is possible she could be having symptoms in some other organ system, like, for example, in her gastrointestinal system. I'm not sure, but that one I can't really answer offhand. That's a very interesting one. I suggest that she get investigated to find out why, because that's not supposed to happen.
Okay. I recently had surgery to remove fibroids, but having persistent pain in the left side and ultrasound show it is an ovarian cyst. Can my left ovary be removed after trying for another child? And if so, can it be done while having a C-section delivery?
The left ovary can be removed, but the thing is, if you have a cyst, if there's a cyst in the ovary, normally what we do is something called an ovarian cystectomy, which is taking the cyst out and sparing the ovary. So there are different types of cysts, and they are managed in different ways. So some types of cysts are managed very conservatively. So you take the cyst out, leave the ovary. There are some that are more complicated, that you want to take the ovary out. Now, doing this at the time of a cesarean section can be a bit tricky, because when a woman is pregnant, the blood flow to her entire pelvis increases significantly. So when you're doing a cesarean section, we try to avoid doing other gynecological procedures at the same time, because the blood loss can be significant. But it depends on the kind of cyst that you're dealing with. Some cysts, you just take the cyst out. So for example, if a woman has a cyst, like, is a cyst called a dermoid cyst, you would take that cyst out and leave the ovary. There are other kind of cysts that are malignant or cancerous. And sometimes doing the ultrasound can give you an idea of what it is like, although the only way to diagnose it is to take it out and send it to the lab. So taking the cyst out, it depends on the kind of cyst that the patient has. And there are many, many different types of cysts.
Okay. This one is not related to that. Style Cosmetics is asking, what are the signs of breast cancer? So I'm just throwing that one in because it's there. I'm trying to cover as many as I possibly can.
No, man, I'm good. So,
Okay.
so breast cancer, weird, man, because we talk about breast cancer, but there are many different types of breast cancer, and they can present in different ways. And one of the commonest ways is diagnosed is when women actually find a lump in their own breast, or their partner finds a lump in their breast. So the commonest thing is finding a lump in your breast. And breast cancer typically affects one breast, or in some cases, it can affect both. When a woman has a lump in her breast and she has breast cancer, usually it is not tender. If you have a very tender lump in your breast that comes up suddenly, usually it's not cancerous, usually it's not. So it tends not to have pain. Women with breast cancer will have pain if the cancer becomes advanced. And normally you feel it before it becomes advanced. So a lump in the breast is a common symptom. Another symptom is pain or discomfort. Another symptom is a nipple discharge. So the commonest thing to come out of a woman's nipple is milk when she's breastfeeding. But in breast cancer, if you have a discharge associated with breast cancer, it's usually a bloody discharge. So it may look like just blood alone, or it can look like some watery bloody fluid. Some women have a rash on their breast when they have breast cancer. So for example, they can have a flaky rash on the skin of the breast or the nipple. Some women have this change called peau d'orange, which is French for when it looks like an orange skin. You know, an orange looks dimpled. Sometimes when a woman has breast cancer, it can have that kind of appearance. So those are the most common symptoms or signs you will get with breast cancer.
Oh, okay. All right. Is it normal for someone to have painful, heavy bleeding and having period up to twice every other month?
Every other month, no. So a normal cycle, okay? The period should last anywhere from three days to a maximum of 10. It's not supposed to reach 10. So if your periods reach 10 days, that's not a good thing. And it's supposed to come every 21 to 35 days. That's the normal range. So if you have enough period that lasts, for example, 2 weeks, and then a week later start back again, or less than a week, starts back again, that's not normal. If you see a period now and 2 months pass before it comes back again, that's not normal. So a normal cycle, period's supposed to last anywhere from 3 to 10 days. And it's supposed to recur every 21 to 35 days. So anything outside of that range is abnormal.
Okay, Jean is asking, for someone who is at the menopausal stage and has fibroids with just excruciating pain but no bleeding, what is the best treatment?
Any kind of pelvic pain is to be evaluated. And if a woman is in menopause and she has excruciating what you call fibroid pain, the important thing is to find out, is the pain caused by the fibroid? Because sometimes a woman can have fibroids with pelvic pain, but the pain could be due to something else. For example, to a bladder problem, or it could be due to a bowel problem. But anything with severe pain needs to be evaluated. And if it is found that it is really the presence of the fibroids, then it's best to take it out. Because you see, the main purpose of a uterus is for reproduction. So if you find a woman has passed that stage and her uterus is problematic and it's affecting her quality of life, it's best to take it out.
Yeah. Kristen Dean is asking, does lupus affect fibroids or vice versa?
That's a good question. I really don't have an answer for that because I'm not sure how much research has really been done on those conditions. I know that lupus is a very strange disorder, and sometimes in lupus, you can have situations where, for example, your platelet count drops. Platelets are these components of blood that help your blood to clot. So if a woman has fibroids and her platelet count drops, that can have implications for a cycle. She can have heavy bleeding, and that can be a problem. But in terms of the lupus actually affecting the growth, the lupus can affect the symptoms, but I'm not sure if it can affect the actual growth of the fibroids. I haven't seen any research to confirm or refute that.
Sorry. Okay. Is it a cause for concern if after a woman has done an hysterectomy and removal of the cervix and have bleeding about 8 months after surgery? What are the possible causes of the bleeding?
That's a good question again, and that is something she needs to visit her doctor for. Sometimes after surgery, if you take the cervix out, all right, when the cervix is taken out with the uterus, there should be no bleeding down there. Sometimes when the top of the vagina heals, where the cervix was, you can have something called granulation tissue. It's kind of like scar tissue, but it can be tender and red, and it can bleed. Sometimes after surgery, if the fallopian tubes and ovaries are left behind, sometimes the incision at the top, the fallopian tube can kind of slip through that while the healing process is taking place. So any kind of bleeding should be evaluated. Those are the two commonest reasons, but she really needs to be evaluated. Very rarely a woman can develop cancer in her vagina, and that's unrelated to having a hysterectomy done. But after hysterectomy, any kind of bleeding should be evaluated. You're not supposed to bleed after hysterectomy, especially if the cervix has been taken out.
Okay. When a woman does tie off, can it be pulled back?
All right, so this thing about tie off is not really, people get the impression you just tie something and leave it, but it's a bit more than that. So the proper word is tubal ligation, and there are different ways of doing it. If it's done laparoscopically, that is through the tube in the navel, what is typically done is that some small rings are put on the tube. So the tube is, let me see if I can find something to show you. Hold on. Like if the tube looks like this, they bend it like this, and they tie something or put a ring around it. If you have it done at the time of surgery, like at the time of a cesarean section, you tie something around it and you cut off this top part. So you cut off this loop at the top. So very often the tubes are actually cut. So it's not something you're going to just pull. If a woman has a tubal ligation and you want to reverse it, what it means is that you'll have to go in and reattach the tubes, like make an incision again and join them back up. And there is no guarantee that it will work. It can be done, but there's no guarantee it will work. And sometimes you can stitch it back and the tube is rejoined, but it may not function the way it should function. So it's not always possible to do it. But it can be done. Tubal ligation can be reversed. But when a woman makes a decision to do that, it's supposed to be a permanent fix. That's why if somebody's doing it, they must be absolutely sure they don't want any more children, because there's no guarantee you can reverse it.
Okay. Arlene Orton is asking about, back to the question of PCOS. What is the purpose of scraping the lining of the womb in a patient with PCOS? And what is the best treatment?
Okay, so PCOS now, what happens with that? Sometimes women with it can have intractable bleeding. So sometimes women with PCOS can have bleeding going on for a very, 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 very long time. And sometimes when you scrape the uterus or suck the lining out, aspirate it, it can actually help to stop the bleeding. The other thing is women with PCOS sometimes have this thing called endometrial hyperplasia. The endometrium is the lining of the uterus, and hyperplasia is overgrowth. When you hear the term hyper, it means too much, like when somebody too hype, them just enough. Hyper is too much, and plasia is growth. So some people at PCOS have what they call hyperplasia. The lining grows too much. And hyperplasia can sometimes progress to cancer, or sometimes it can become abnormal and precancerous. So sometimes when somebody has that and you scrape the uterus, you made a one of two things. One, you can actually have to stop that particular bleeding episode. And the second thing is you may be able to diagnose and tell them if they have hyperplasia or not. And if they do have hyperplasia, that may alter the kind of treatment you give them. Because if hyperplasia is a diagnosis, they typically be put on some medication for at least about 6 months or so to counteract it, to make the lining quiet back down again.
Okay. A question from Nadine Goodall on YouTube, or no, on Facebook. Is it okay to feel so much pain during period? Never used to have pain. Now she's going mad. And she's also asking, is it okay for her to take Bush for diabetes than the pill?
All right, to answer that question, firstly, it is never normal for a woman to have such severe period pain that she's in agony. That's never a normal thing. And I want to emphasize that because too many women suffer in silence. There's this cultural thing where people think, you know, women's supposed to have pain and feel pain, a woman makes her feel pain, etc. But no woman is supposed to have bad pain with their period to the point where it affects the quality of life, where they can't go to school, they can't go to work, they can't function properly, they have to be lying down in bed, they have to be living on painkillers. That is abnormal. That's not supposed to happen. So if you find that you are having severe pain like that, you need to go to your doctor and decide how this is going to be investigated and managed. The second thing with the diabetes thing, I'm not encouraging anybody with diabetes to try no Bush. The most important thing with that is to have the diabetes evaluated and be put on the appropriate type of medication, which is either going to be insulin, which you inject, or oral medication, tablets, or a combination of both. I'm very wary of this Bush thing because diabetes is a weird condition. We call diabetes sugar, but diabetes is more than just having an elevated blood sugar. Diabetes is very complex, and it consists of a lot of abnormalities, including high blood sugar, abnormalities of insulin in the body, abnormalities of the inflammatory system in the body, circulation problems, nerve problems, kidney problems. It is not something to experiment with. It can go bad very quickly. So my advice is to go to the doctor, decide what medications are best, and go to a good nutritionist. Instead of the herbal stuff, go to a good nutritionist who can advise you what to eat and what not to eat. Because dietary manipulation is extremely important with diabetes, as well as exercise, as well as monitoring your environment, because stress can affect diabetic control as well. You have to have a holistic approach. So the drug thing is one thing, the diet is another thing. Try to exercise and look at your environment. Because again, if you work at a toxic workplace or live in a toxic home, that can actually help to throw your diabetes out of control.
Okay, Lorna is asking, should after hysterectomy, one should take hormone replacement or treatment even after menopause?
That's a good question. And it depends on the person, because menopause is a natural process, but surgical menopause can be sudden and dramatic. So if a woman goes into menopause naturally, when her ovaries gradually are shut down, she may or may not have menopausal symptoms. If she goes into surgical menopause, for example, as a hysterectomy and the ovaries are taken out and she was seeing periods before and they suddenly stop, the onset can be dramatic, can include a lot of hot flashes and flashes and discomfort, vaginal dryness, sleep disturbance, fatigue in the day, etc. So if a woman has symptoms like that, it is a good idea to be on hormone replacement to improve her quality of life, at least temporarily. Hormone replacement is not something you go on for the rest of your life, you know? And it's not for everybody either, because some women enter menopause gracefully and they have no symptoms. And if a woman enters menopause at the average time, which is 51 to 52, and her symptoms are not that bad, she really may not need any hormone replacement. If a woman's symptoms are severe and it's affecting her quality of life, hormone replacement will help. Or if a woman enters menopause early, so for example, the average age is 51 to 52. So if a woman goes into menopause at, let's say, her early 40s, it would be a good idea to take hormone replacement, because it's been found that when women go in menopause early and the estrogen level drops, they have a higher risk for heart disease and osteoporosis, which is weak bones, which can predispose them to fractures, such as hip fractures or wrist fractures, spinal fractures, etc. So it depends on the person's age and their symptoms and how the onset, the kind of onset of menopause, if it was sudden or just gradual.
Well, Lorna is agreeing that the symptoms you listed, they are true. Jean asks, her daughter just had a hysterectomy, but keeps having fluid passing out and has to wear a pad. What is the cause? And it's a clear fluid, it's not bloody.
If she just had hysterectomy done during the healing phase, while the vagina is healing, it is common to have a discharge like that. So if it is something within the past few weeks, that's not really uncommon, and I wouldn't really worry too much about that. If it's something she had years ago, how long ago was it? If it's something recent, I wouldn't worry about it. If it's something that happened years ago and she had been the discharge now, then that should be investigated.
It said just had. She said just had, so it sounds like it's recent.
Oh yeah, man. All right.
That's a question on Facebook.
All right. So
no, YouTube. Sorry.
The first couple of weeks, you can have that while it's healing up. It's common to have that and to have to wear a pad. Definitely. Yeah.
My daughter, 27, was diagnosed with PMDD. What would you recommend?
All right, for those who don't know, PMDD is premenstrual dysphoric disorder. Premenstrual means before the period, and dysphoria means sadness and uneasiness. So it's what, you know, when people talk about PMS, it's a severe form of that where people get very, very sad, literally sink into depression for the period. And the management, again, it varies. Going on antidepressants definitely helps, but there are other things that help as well. For example, dietary changes, exercise, those are very important. And sometimes they may have some kind of underlying cause, psychological cause that may predispose them as well. So some kind of therapy may be helpful as well. But again, that's something that is individualized. But it's something that is not to be taken lightly, because some women some men have a really hard time before their period. I remember years ago when I worked at Spanish Town Hospital, one of my friends who worked in the lab told me that she literally thought she was going crazy every month. And she didn't understand what was going on until she realized that it was something linked to her cycle, and the symptoms would come on before her periods. So that's something not to be taken lightly. So it can be severe. Everybody's still there, or y'all fell asleep?
Oh, I'm sorry. Deidre, sorry, my mic was muted. Deidre is asking, could you speak on dermoids on the ovary? Does it affect childbearing?
All right, so dermoids are these cysts. Dermoids are some weird cysts, okay? Dermoids are weird. There's some cysts that define the ovary, and they can have some weird kinds of tissue, like they can have hair, and they can have bone and teeth and all this weird stuff. Mm-hmm. They're very, very common, and they're usually not a barrier to fertility. No.
Okay. Tubal ligation done when in their mid-40s, could the person have early menopause?
There is some research to show that sometimes when it is done late, because you interfere with, there is some interference with the blood flow to the uterus. It can predispose someone to go into menopause a little earlier but the association is not very strong. So the likelihood is not very high. And as a matter of fact, I have several patients who have had it and they haven't got into early menopause. So there may be a slightly increased risk, slightly.
Okay, I'm just seeing a question. This one was, is it a subtotal hysterectomy would stop a period? I think that's a question being asked.
So a subtotal hysterectomy is when you take out the uterus. Okay, the lowermost part of the uterus is the cervix. So if you put your finger in your vagina and feel at the top of it, you're going to feel something that feels like a nose, and that's the cervix. So very often with a hysterectomy, the cervix is taken out. Sometimes the uterus is taken out and the cervix is left behind. We call it a subtotal. And usually there's no bleeding. Some women may have some spotting every month because at the point where you cut the uterus to take it out, some of the tissue, like the lining of the womb, may be at the very top, and it can shed like a mini period every month. So that can happen. But most people don't bleed.
Okay. Uterine dermoid, it's another dermoid question. Sis, are they affected by the menstrual cycle? Can they hurt or cause pain during ovulation? If so, why?
So dermoids are problems with the ovaries, not the uterus. And they're not, they shouldn't really cause any problems like with the cycle. If you have a big dermoid cyst, by virtue of the size, you can have some pelvic discomfort, but it's not going to cause period pain.
Okay. Emily's asking, what about random sharp, intense pains in the lower abdominal region? It only lasts for a couple of seconds. As mentioned, it's completely random and can happen multiple times a day.
That is something that has to be investigated. It could be something gynecological, but it could be also something affecting the nerves. For example, the nerves that supply the wall of the abdomen.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have these kind of pains, it could be something internal, for example, like endometriosis or a cyst in the ovary. It could be something related to your kidney. It could be something related to your gastrointestinal system, because your bowel is in your abdomen and your pelvis as well. Or it could be something related to your abdominal wall. The wall of your abdomen where you have muscle and you have your skin and other tissue. So that is something that you have to get that investigated to actually answer that question, because it's hard to just tell what would cause that. But there are different things that can make you have random sporadic pain.
A question Terry is asking asking. She said she can't hold her urine whenever I'm finished and stand up, it runs down. What is happening to me? What is happening?
All right. Can't you tell you how old she is and if she's had children?
Terry, if you're listening, can you take the mic and respond to Doctor's question? He wants to know your age and if you have kids. While we wait on Terry, let me see. What causes a woman to gain weight after hysterectomy?
Hysterectomy in and of itself doesn't cause women to gain weight. So having a uterus taken out is not going to make you gain weight. That by itself. If you have a hysterectomy and your ovaries are taken out, then you're going to menopause. And some women, when they're going to menopause, may gain weight. But just taking the uterus alone out, that itself is not going to just make you gain weight like that.
A question is asked, is it okay to have spotting 5 months after giving birth for 1 week while breastfeeding alone?
When a woman breastfeeds after birth, it keeps the periods away. But the thing is that she can have intermittent episodes of bleeding if she's breastfeeding. So after about 5 months, it is not uncommon to have those irregular episodes of bleeding. So that can happen once you're breastfeeding. So very often, once the baby's under breast, the periods may not really come back regular, but you can have irregular bleeding. That's not uncommon.
Okay, Thomas family is asking, at 34 and have endometriosis and fibroids, am I too young to take out my womb?
No, not too young at all. The question is, again, what are her reproductive ambitions? If it is something where, if she has decided, if she has children and doesn't want any more, or even doesn't have children and doesn't want any, and if the symptoms are so severe that they are affecting her quality of life, she wouldn't be too young. It depends on, that is something she'd have to discuss with her doctor.
Okay. Terry, that question that the person had asked about peeing frequently, and you had asked her age, she's 43. She has children and she's 43. Her mic is not allowing her to speak.
Okay. The term for that is urinary incontinence. And I asked her about having children because it's not uncommon for women to have that after bearing children. Urinary incontinence is very common in women who have had kids, very common. And there are other causes as well. So the best thing for her would be for her to see a doctor called a urologist, who is a doctor who specializes in problems of the bladder and the urinary system. But having children, that alone can cause that. But I don't know if there's anything else going on with her that would predispose her to that. So she needs to be evaluated, have a full urological evaluation.
Okay. Does the size of the fibroids relevant to receiving surgery?
That's a good question. And it varies. If the fibroid is very, very big, then we'd recommend taking it out. So if you come and you have a fibroid, for example, that's 10 centimeters in diameter, or the size of an orange, or even bigger, like the size of a grapefruit, something that size really ought to be taken out of your body. On the other hand, the decision to the surgery partially depends on the symptoms as well. So for example, I've seen women with fibroids the size of, for example, like a lemon, who have no symptoms and don't need surgery. On the other hand, I remember a lady who had one fibroid the size of a guinea seed, and she had to have surgery because the fibroid was right in the cavity where she bled from, and her periods would come and they would not stop. So because of the location of the fibroid and because of her symptoms, she needed to have surgery. So the decision depends not just on the size, but the symptoms. But in general, if you have fibroids that are very big, it's really best to take them out.
Okay, Delia is asking, does a hysterectomy a month was having hot flashes before still having hot flashes? Can I take evening primrose? I think the person is saying they are 53. I'm not sure if she's saying that she had the hysterectomy, but having. Okay.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with evening primrose, and that's very safe. That's very safe. I mean, she can always take that and see if it helps.
Okay. This question is, I am 48 years old and recently was found to have fibroids. This after a very unusual prolonged period, terrible pain. She was told that don't have to do anything because in a few years she'll go into menopause and they will shrink. So do I just continue undergo the inconvenience of spotting after periods till menopause comes?
How old is she now?
48. And she was prescribed Norcolot.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that is another judgment call because women in their 40s who have abnormal bleeding, it's very important to make sure that there's no other cause for the bleeding apart from the fibroids, because she can have fibroids, but she could also have something abnormal in the lining of her uterus making her bleed. So I'm not sure if other investigations have been done to get a sample of what we call her endometrium or the lining. I think at her age, it will be important for that to be done. If you're going to manage her conservatively, it's very important because she may have fibroids, but you could have another cause for the bleeding. I'll give you an example. If you have hemorrhoids, let's say you're an older person, like 60, and you have hemorrhoids, and you bleed when you go to the toilet. We know that hemorrhoids can make you bleed. We know that. We know this. But anybody with rectal bleeding at that age, is mandatory to do something called a colonoscopy to look in the bowel to see if there's anything in the bowel making them bleed as well. Because bowel cancer can make you bleed. So similarly now, if you're in your 40s having weird bleeding and you have fibroids, it's important to make sure that the fibroids are the only reason why you're having this abnormal bleeding and not something else. So my best advice is to have her inquire about making sure there's no other cause for bleeding. That's it.
Can a person with multiple fibroids still have a child?
Definitely, most definitely, very definitely, because I see women like that very often who have multiple fibroids and have children. I'm looking after one of them right now. I saw yesterday. So it's very common. Having multiple fibroids does not mean you cannot have a child.
Is vaginal polyp something to be concerned about?
Polyps. Polyps are these growths of tissue that can occur. These growths of tissue, and they're usually like teardrop shaped, like so. Like, oh, you can see that like this. And polyps can occur in many different parts of your body. So you can have polyps in the nasal cavity. You can have polyps in the cervix, in the uterus, in your colon. So sometimes they occur in the cervix and they stick out in the vagina. It can be a problem because it can make you bleed abnormally, but they're usually not anything dangerous. They're more of a nuisance, but it's really best to take them out. It's best to take them out and send them to the lab to make sure they're not cancerous.
Okay, CC saying 40, no kids as yet, but have done a fibroid surgery and was told there are back multiple of them, and I might need to remove my womb. Do I have to remove it and still not have had a child?
Sorry to hear about that stress. I wouldn't say she has to. Then again, I have not examined her or seen her ultrasound. So I don't know what the doctor was seeing, but usually you don't have to take it out. But then again, I haven't seen her to see how bad it is or how severe it is. So it's hard for me to make an objective comment on that.
Okay, the questions are coming and I'm trying to see. I am 40, no, not that one. Let me see, I have no kids. Okay, I'm 46 years old and I would like to have kids. I asked my doctor to do a uterine embolization and he said, what? And he said, no, what do you think?
She has how many kids?
She has no kids.
All right, uterine embolization.
She would like to have kids. She's 46 and would like to have kids.
All right, uterine embolization is a procedure where you put this substance into the vessels feeding the uterus or feeding the fibroids, and you block them. And when you block them, what happens is that the fibroid gradually shrinks because you're blocking the blood supply, and the blood supply is what keeps it growing. And I think the reason why the doctor probably told her that is because it's best for women who have had kids and don't want any more kids. Because when you block these segments of the uterus, sometimes some of the tissue in the uterus can die, and you don't want to compromise that for someone who has no children. So that may be the reason why.
Okay. What's this one? Please explain fibrosis disease of the breast.
All right, I think you're talking about what I call fibrocystic disease. And it's a condition where you have some of the tissue in the breast becoming hard and lumpy, and you get these cystic areas in it. A cystic area is an area that is like a little, let me think now what it looks like. Imagine a balloon filled with water. That's what a cyst looks like. But when you have fibrocystic changes, the cysts are smaller, like about the size of a gungo pea or a red pea. These changes are not cancerous, but they can cause women a lot of discomfort because sometimes before the period, they act up and they have tenderness. So the management of that is often to have at least a biopsy done or a specimen taken to make sure it really is that that's what you're dealing with. Sometimes we can draw some of the fluid out of the cyst if you have big enough cyst in the breast. And sometimes there are medications you can use to help the symptoms. Somebody mentioned evening primrose oil earlier, and that's something that is used quite a lot to help symptoms of that. But it's a very common condition.
Okay, I am 46 I am 43, have fibroid and tie up, and would like to have a child, have a next child. What could I do?
If you're 43 and you've had fibroid and you have had a tubal ligation and you have fibroids, that's very unlikely to work well, because what you'd need is to take the fibroids out and to reverse the tubal ligation. And when you combine that with someone who is over 40 years of age, that's kind of tricky. It doesn't mean it can't work, but it's very difficult to make that work. In other words, the risks, the chances of her having a normal fertility are not very high, but it's still worth a chance. If she wants to have a child, I would say it's still worth doing it. Once she has realistic expectations, that's it.
Sophia, she said she wasn't sure she heard the response to her question. She's 46 and would like to have kids and asked the doctor to do a uterine embolization. He said, no, what do you think?
Right, no, right. And I answered, I said, if you don't have children, embolization is not a good idea because it can damage the uterus. Okay. And you don't want to damage it if you want to have kids. So that may not be a good idea for her. All right, for example, if she had children, it was that age and she had 3 children. Let's say she had 3 kids, but the fibroids were making her periods miserable and she doesn't want to have children. Then by all means, that would be a good option. But for someone who's never had a child to do that, it can damage the uterus and give her a harder time getting pregnant. So it may get rid of the fibroid symptoms, but it may cause other problems that can be a barrier to her fertility.
Okay, does HPV, Sophia, I hope you heard the response this time. Does HPV cause the breast to have a watery discharge?
No, it does not.
Question, what is the best treatment for hirsutism? Hirsutism.
Hirsutism is a condition where there's excess hair. So for example, when women have excess facial hair, they have excess hair on the arms, the legs, the chest, that's what they call hirsutism. And the management depends on what is causing it. So for some people it's genetic, for some people it's hormonal, for some people it's drug related, like the medication they're on. So for example, many women with PCOS have hirsutism. And the management is often a combination of hormone treatment, because sometimes it can be associated with elevated testosterone. It's the male sex hormone. So it may be a combination of drug treatment and dermatological treatment where they actually treat the hair where it's growing.
Is vaginal polyps something to be concerned about? The person I thought that question was responded, but
I answered that question. I said you can have polyps down there, and it's not, if you have them, it's best to remove them. It's not something dangerous, but any abnormal growth should be removed, but it's not something dangerous. It's when you say concerned about, it's kind of difficult to answer. I mean, it's anything that's not normal you should be concerned about, but there are different levels of concern. So if you have them, I suggest you get them removed, but it shouldn't make you sick or anything like that.
What are the consequences of not getting your second dose of HPV?
You mean the vaccine? The vaccine.
Yes,
yeah,
HPV,
okay.
yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's that you will not be covered as well as if you got the full dose. That's it. So your coverage is not going to be as good. You're not going to get sick or anything. So, and to be honest, once you're getting regular pap smears done, your risk of getting cervical cancer is almost zero anyway.
Okay. All right, let me see. I think there's so many questions that I'm trying to scroll, and in scrolling, some are being missed. So it's not intentional if you're not seeing. No, it's not you so much now. And I had to move because my computer died, so I had to move so I can
If you are sorry, but you look like you work hard tonight.
I'm telling you, okay. I'm trying to scroll up. I'm being told I missed some questions, but I'm not finding. There are so many questions. I'm not seeing some of them. Let me see if I can. There was one on. Is it normal to feel sick before ovulation? I'm seeing that one on YouTube.
I wouldn't say it's normal, but it's not uncommon to have symptoms before ovulation. Sometimes some women have breast tenderness, nausea, pelvic cramps, mood swings. They're very common. If you have those symptoms, sometimes taking calcium, 600 milligrams of calcium twice a day, every day. Sometimes if you take that over a period or after a period of months, some of those symptoms can decrease.
Okay. John L is asking, how long after fibroid surgery can a woman have children?
We normally tell you to wait about 6 months or so. Yeah, before you try to get pregnant.
I'm seeing one here. 41 years old. I have fibroids. I was scheduled for a surgery in May. However, the bleeding won't stop. Eventually, it did. The doctor gave me Depo-Provera along with minigynon to prevent the cycle from coming. These did not stop it. I am bleeding since April until now, April 3 until now. I pass a lot of class. I am scheduled to do a pelvic ultrasound June 9. What is your advice?
Yeah, to do the ultrasound, definitely. And to discuss other drug treatment options with your doctor. Because if you're getting the Depo-Provera is an injection that's used for birth control, but it often helps to control bleeding. And minigynon is a birth control. And if you're using both and you're still bleeding, you may need to want to revise your treatment options. But the ultrasound is very important because if you have, I suspect you might have fibroids or at least one fibroid in the cavity of the uterus. That's the area where you bleed from, where the baby will develop. And those are the worst ones to have. When you have those, the bleeding can be intractable, can just not stop. And sometimes the only way to stop it is to actually have surgery to take the fibroids out, whether you're bleeding or not. So if you are scheduled to have the ultrasound done, definitely go under the ultrasound.
Okay, Miss Green daughter is saying, I'm 45 period and my period is 21 days late. I have fibroid. Is it possible that I may be starting menopause or pregnant?
Could be pregnant. Do the pregnancy test first. Good luck with that. Could also be entering menopause too, because the average age of menopause is 51 to 52. But some women enter it earlier. So sometimes some women in the mid-40s may start to skip periods. But the important thing is to at least get a pregnancy test done first, definitely.
Does HPV cause the breast of a what? No, that one was answered already. Does HPV cause the breast of a watery discharge?
No, it doesn't.
Okay. Again, regarding the HPV vaccine, it was the one that was given to teenage girls in high school. The time given for the second dose has passed. What is the maximum time between the doses for it to be effective?
Oh man, I think it's about 6 months or so off the top of my head, but I don't remember offhand. To be honest, I remember that one offhand to answer that question.
Is birth control recommended for hormone imbalance?
That's an interesting question because hormone imbalance is a very broad thing. You have many different hormones that can be imbalanced. So it depends on the type of hormone imbalance. That's a very difficult thing to answer generally. So for example, if you have a hormone imbalance thing where your thyroid hormones are out, that would be an appropriate kind of management. So it depends on the kind of hormone imbalance you have.
Sorry, there's another question regarding HPV. It says, what are some of the symptoms caused by HPV?
HPV is a virus, human papillomavirus. The thing about HPV is that it is very common, and there are many different types. There are over 200 types of HPV, and some types cause no symptoms whatsoever, and some types can actually cause cancer. So when you say HPV, there's so many different types of HPV. So if you say that you have HPV, that means nothing to me because I don't know the type. It's like you tell me you have a dog at home. It says nothing to me really. You could have like a little Shih Tzu or something. In that case, I don't really care about that. Or you could have some big pit bull you're trained to be aggressive, in which case I'm not going to your house. So you have different types. So some types of HPV can cause precancerous changes in the cervix. Some types of HPV can cause genital warts. These warts you may see like on the vulva or the perineum, which is the area between the vulva and the anus or around the anus. Some types of HPV cause cancer of the cervix or cancer of the vagina or the vulva or anal cancer or even throat cancer. So there are different types of HPV that cause different things.
Here's one that I think Karine missed.
Sorry,
It said,
sorry.
when the fibroid is intramural, what does that mean?
Intramural means it is
My mic was muted.
in the walls, wholly and solely within the walls of the uterus. So it doesn't bulge sticking out on the outside. It doesn't bulge sticking into the inside. I see somebody asking for Shelley's number again, and I'm glad to give you again. Shelley Ann Weeks, 876-798-0820. She'd gladly talk to you. 798-0820. That's Shelley's number.
What's the cause of severe leg cramps after menses?
Sometimes what happens is that you have these nerves that go to your pelvis. And some of these nerves actually are connected to nerves going on into your legs. And that's why sometimes you can have these nerves. It's what you call, sometimes that's why you can have the pain. That kind of pain is called referred pain. So it's not because there's any disease in your leg, but the nerve gets stimulated and it transmits, what do you want to call it now, simply? An impulse, like a shock into your leg. So some women, for example, with endometriosis, the nerves in the pelvis may get irritated or affected, and they can actually feel the pain going on into the leg. Sometimes there's a condition called sciatica, where they have this nerve called the sciatic nerve, and it can get compressed. And when that nerve gets compressed, again, you can feel pain going on into your leg. So there are different causes for that.
Okay. All right. I hope Camille heard that. There's a question from, this is not related to that. Christine is asking, she has diabetes, hypertension, hypertensive, heart disease, among other illnesses, and it is very hard to control them at times. She didn't have a question, it's a statement. But,
She has, okay.
diabetes, she's
Tension and heart disease.
hypertension. Yes, right.
In her, I would just recommend that she makes sure she gets regular checkups and she stays on her medication, she gets monitored. It's important that she has a good nutritionist to advise her. Because when you combine diabetes and hypertension, diet is extremely important. Diet and lifestyle, extremely important. So our diet is important, the medication is important, and exercise is important. And our environment is important because stress can worsen both diabetes and hypertension. Both of them respond to stress. So you have to have a holistic approach when you manage a combination of conditions like that.
Okay, Keisha is asking, how bad is it fibroids when your menstrual cycle is mostly clot, pain, and intermittent flow of blood?
No, man, all right. When she has that, that is not good. So let me tell you. When a woman sees her period, there are these chemicals in menstrual blood that prevent it from clotting. So if a woman is bleeding and passing clots, it means that her flow is too heavy. It means that her flow has overwhelmed the system that has been put in place naturally to prevent her blood from clotting. So if she has miserable periods like that, she needs to see her doctor and be evaluated. That's not normal. That's very abnormal.
Okay. Tamira, why does my blood pressure rise just before and during my period?
That's another good question again, and it may be related to the stress of the period itself. That's the most common, that's the most reasonable explanation I can think of.
Okay. There was a question you were responding to read the HPV, and the person responded that it's HPV-1. Just letting you know that. Okay. I think the questions are, I hope I've not missed any. There is one that you had responded to earlier about the person was prescribed Norculot. She had a follow-up question where she said, wouldn't an ultrasound show any abnormalities? Because I was told that based on the ultrasound, kidney, pancreas, and liver were okay.
Right, kidney, pancreas, and liver are usually unrelated to the symptoms she's having. Norculot is something used to control abnormal uterine bleeding. So you can have abnormal bleeding and a totally normal ultrasound. So you can have normal looking organs, but they just misbehave and they don't behave properly. So the ultrasound may not necessarily show something abnormal.
Oh dear.
I'm sorry, are you hearing me?
I hear you very well.
Okay, yes, my AirPods died.
Hey man,
My
everything
computer died, my AirPods died. So
where are you? You did a marathon this evening?
Yes. Okay. All right. I'm going to take about 2 more questions before we wrap up. Hold on just a minute. Does an exercise regime help with the symptoms of fibroid? That was it. That was just posted. Belinda is asking that. Yeah. Does an exercise regime help with the symptoms?
It depends on the symptoms and the severity. It really does. But having a healthy lifestyle has the potential to help alleviate the symptoms. It depends on the severity of the symptoms. So if you have very big fibroids distorting the lining of the womb, it may not make a big difference. But it's always a good idea to embark on a good exercise program because it has the potential to help symptoms.
Okay, so Doc, one more question. I'm aware that natural remedies, like I had asked earlier, may reduce large fibroids, but won't remove them. Does a fibroid grow with pregnancy?
That's another interesting question because that's unpredictable, you know? Some patients, because of the hormonal changes in pregnancy, fibroids can get very big, and some really don't change at all because fibroids are not all the same in terms of how they behave. So for example, one of my patients who has fibroids, I saw her yesterday, and her fibroids haven't changed at all, really. And in some people, you can get this sudden growth associated with pain. So having fibroids in pregnancy, that's a very, very, very unpredictable thing. The behavior is very unpredictable.
Okay. This one, is it a repeat question? Is there any kind of treatment for HPV? What are the causes?
So HPV is a virus, and there are many different subtypes. The HPV that you would get, for example, that would show up on a pap smear that would affect your cervix, those are usually transmitted in some kind of sexual activity. But you don't have to have sex to be affected by HPV. So for example, you can get genital warts, these warts on the vulva, even without being penetrated. One of the worst cases of genital warts I've ever seen was in a woman who was a virgin. She never had sex, but she and her partner engaged in intimacy and sexual contact. And she had, the warts on her vulva. But HPV can cause warts all over the place. Sometimes, somebody may even have warts on their hands and they can transmit it. But from a gynecological perspective, most of the times it's associated with some type of sexual contact.
Okay, thank you. I think that we have exhausted the questions. I'm sorry if a question was asked and I missed it or I did not ask
and
it.
And exhausted your equipment too.
Yes. Okay, so it wasn't all questions, Doc. There were commendations commending you on an excellent presentation. So it wasn't all questions.
Thank you very much for having me, man. I feel special, and I'm just grateful that you reached out to me, and I hope it made a difference, because sometimes people have questions, and I find that sometimes they feel intimidated to ask the doctor certain questions, or they may not necessarily need a doctor's appointment to have questions, answered. So I'm grateful to be of use in this kind of forum. You ladies, just take care of yourselves. Please don't get COVID. You still there?
Yes, I'm here. I'm sorry.
Take care of yourselves, please don't get COVID, and please get vaccinated, and don't allow people to tell you conspiracy, weird stuff. I'm vaccinated. I got fully vaccinated. My daughter across from me is getting vaccinated. My wife got vaccinated, my sister as well, my sister-in-law. It's important, the potential benefits outweigh the risks, put it that way. And if I'm a medical doctor and I went to med school and studied all of this and I chose to get stuck twice, there must be a good reason for that. But just keep safe.
Thank
everybody.
you so much, Doc. Thank you so much. We appreciate it. And we will be inviting you back, because you realize that there's so many questions and persons would want to ask follow-up, but in the interest of time. So look out for another invitation.
Yeah, man, my love and man. Take care of yourself and keep safe.
Yes, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Look out for your we will send our appreciation to your office. Okay, so look out for that.
Where's Lorraine? Lorraine is the one who invited you. Is she around?
I don't know if she's still online,
Yeah, big up Lorraine here.
She's there.
Yeah, Lorraine, I love you bad. I trust me, anything for you.
Yes.
All right.
Thanks much, Doc.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Thanks.
Okay, visitors and members, we thank you so much for your active participation. And I know we got a lot. Some persons did type that it was very informative. I myself learned a lot this evening. And so we will be doing this again. So you can look out for that. Auntie Janet, do you have anything to add before we close?
Yes, Karine. Sisters, we are inviting you tomorrow evening to join us for a study on the 7 relational sins. It will be done by Elder. Okay. It will be done by Elder Judith Forbes. It's on Monday evenings at 8:30. 8:30 to 7:30 to 8:30. 1 hour each Monday evening for the month of June. Please join us as we study the 7 deadly relationship sins. Monday evenings for the month of June, 7:30 to 8:30. Thanks for joining us on this forum. We do appreciate it. And I know that we have learned
Yes.
a whole lot. There are some things that I didn't even know that we women go through. I'm telling you, you know. So we'll be sending out this link for us to do the study on Monday evenings. Somebody's asking to send the link, so we'll send out link again. All right. Thank you again for joining us, and we are looking forward to seeing you again tomorrow evening. Over to you, Sister Karine.
Okay, thanks. Well, that's pretty much wraps it up for this evening. It went much longer than we expected, but it was necessary. And so thank you again, everyone. Have a good week and you keep safe.
All right, let us have a word of prayer to close.
Okay.
Father God, we just want to thank you for your grace and your mercies. We want to thank you for your keeping care over us. We know, dear Father, that you know that we are concerned about our health, and you have provided the person this evening to answer some of the questions that we have. Father God, those who are suffering in different ways, I ask that you will be with them as they cope and as they confront the situation that they are in. Father God, in spite of everything, you said you will give us peace, and help us, dear Father, as we look forward to optimizing health. We will consider all it is that you want us to do, and we'll do them. May your Holy Spirit rest, remain, and abide with us now. Have mercy upon each and every one of us. Cover us, oh God, I pray. And into your hands I commit ourselves, in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, sisters.
Yes. Take care, everybody.